All right. Well, and since I haven't introduced myself yet, my name is Shayna Lang. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for IN. And IN is short for In Pathways to Inclusive Higher Education. That's our nonprofit that supports students with intellectual disabilities going to college. So Elise Creamer and myself, we're going to be the ones running the fall webinar series and hopefully be a continuous resource for you as you guys move forward in what's the best next step for your students. So a quick overview of what our nonprofit does. As I mentioned, we serve students with intellectual disabilities and their families and their teachers in order to help prepare them for college pathways. And we call those college pathways inclusive higher education programs. And they're all across the state of Colorado, and we'll share about which universities have those options. And really what they focus on for our students is academic growth, social development, career advancement, and independence. So it's a very holistic program for our students so that when they're moving on beyond K-12, going to their post-secondary outcomes, they're really gaining tons of knowledge and experiences in all of those categories and growing as a holistic person. So our role, because we are not the programs themselves, we don't provide those direct services to students on campus. We simply inform. That's really our main area of focus. And so some of the 4 categories in which we do that is education. So that's where we're reaching out to educators and teachers and people in the field to let them know that these college options exist. So hopefully that trickles down to families and students. We do outreach to our families and students, offering webinars like these, offering mentorship programs to help students become aware of these options and know that it's an option for them in their future. We also work on expansion statewide. So we work with higher education institutions across Colorado to help them develop programs for these students, making sure that they're inclusive and gathering funding and legislative support to encourage that expansion. And we're super excited because we're in the thick of developing new programs here in Colorado, and I'll share a bit more about those. And then we also track our outcomes. So we get to oversee all of the programs that support these students. And so from across the state, we get to see what are our outcomes from students with intellectual disabilities going to college. So that's really where IN comes into play when it comes to students pursuing inclusive higher ed. So as I mentioned, this is one of 8 webinars this semester. And so this one is really just kind of dipping our toe back into the semester and having everybody think critically about ways to develop skills, college readiness skills for our students with intellectual disabilities. So our webinar objectives are really going to be focused on that skill development. I'm going to start by going over college options for students with disabilities on the front end, giving a peek at what inclusive college programs do and how they support our students. But then a bulk of our time is really going to be on what are some of the skills that we have learned since starting these programs that our students need to know and should be developing during K-12 or during their transition programs. And then we'll share some resources with you to hopefully get your brain thinking about what are some ways that you can start implementing those skills now and feel equipped and feel encouraged, ideally, to prepare your students for college. So I'm going to jump into the overview first of just disability services in higher education in general. I know for those of you that are joining in on our webinar right now, you're really focused on that students with intellectual disabilities or those that have an IEP in that kind of category, which is awesome. That's where the bulk of our time is going to be. But I also like to kind of share all of the categories of disability supports that students could access depending on their level of need. So this just shows a timeline of when disability services really started ticking up in higher education, when nationally we began to see this is a really important population that are so capable of great things that we need to accommodate and support. So those first 2 categories are your basic ADA laws that you think about and hear about when you go to college or talk about college, where they allow for accommodations for students that meet college entry criteria. But it wasn't until 2008 that we said nationally, there are students with intellectual disabilities that don't meet college entry criteria, but still would benefit from college options. So in 2008, there was a national movement to help develop inclusive higher education programs, specifically for our students with intellectual disabilities or those that don't meet college entrance criteria. So it's really exciting. They developed this national organization called Think College, which is a wonderful resource. You'll see tons of links from them throughout our presentation. And that started, as I mentioned, in 2008. It took a while for Colorado to jump on board. So it wasn't until 2016 that Colorado said, we're going to start programs here. We were the last of 3 states, but the benefit of that is that we learned from the growth and experience across the nation how to really launch strong programs in the state of Colorado. So we started with 3 pilot programs, and that has since expanded. We have 4 operating right now, and then we just received more legislation to expand to upwards of 4 more. So we could be doubling in the next year, which is really exciting. But this is important, I think, for families to see. This is still fairly new in Colorado. And so when it feels like maybe you don't have all the resources or all the information, which is so valid for that to be frustrating, hopefully you can see that this is still up and coming, and we're really trying to ingrain it in all educators, all special educators' minds, that every student has the possibility to go to college now. So under those kind of laws, there are 3 categories of support that come into play. There's a traditional disability services, which this is for your typical student that would be able to meet college entry criteria, and would only require things like accommodation. So maybe extended time on exams, preferential seating in a class, maybe an interpreter, but they would be able to meet all the same expectations of the college courses that they're enrolled in, and that they're going to pursue a traditional degree. So this is not typically for students that are going onto those transition programs. This is for students with a little bit more access to college typically. The middle ground category, I call this supplemental services. This is for students that have disabilities, have a 504, maybe an IEP, but again, can meet that college entry criteria, can be admitted typically, but require a bit more social support or executive functioning support. They would still be receiving a traditional degree, an associate's or bachelor's, but these supplemental programs that exist across Colorado offer more of that social guidance. So some peer mentorship to help them along the way, maybe coaching for executive functioning and things like that. But really where our students fall, the students that we serve, students with intellectual disabilities, is under the inclusive higher education service model. And so this is not required at all institutions of higher ed. These are only at a select few, and they are primarily for students that don't meet that college entry criteria. And they offer, this is kind of the huge difference between them and the other 2 services, they offer modifications. So students that enroll through these programs are allowed to receive modifications in their college courses. They are still typically included like any other student, and they're taking typical college classes, but there's a program coordinator that works with faculty to adapt the assignments to meet their cognitive level. Because of that, that means that they're not receiving the same credential as their peers that are completing higher level tasks. Instead, they're going to receive a certificate credential. So it's not a traditional bachelor's or associate's degree, but a certificate. Still accredited by the institution, approved by the institution, requires lots of hard work and grades and all of those things, but it's more at their level and at their pace. And they're also able to select an area of study or a major, just like any other student, and kind of choose classes that help them build skills for their area of interest in a vocational setting. So these students tend to need a bit more support in several areas, and those are the pillars we're going to talk about. So they can access peer, mentor, and staff support in their academics, in their social life, in their independence, and in their vocational development. So real quick, kind of wanted to go over some base level differences between high school and college, no matter which of those categories your students fall into. And I don't think any of these will be a shock to us, but sometimes it's a good reminder, especially as we're thinking of how to prepare students for college, to have these differences in mind so that they're mentally prepared for what they might encounter and what they might expect. So under high school, the law that supports disability services is the IDEA, and that's really focused on ensuring that students with disabilities experience success. That's kind of the focus, that's the draw. And then with college, it's under the ADA law, or the 504. And their focus, or that law's focus, is that students with disabilities have access, but it doesn't guarantee that they experience success. So that's a really big difference in terms of practice and thought. There's so much more responsibility put on the student to navigate resources necessary for them to be successful. Typically in high school, you're going to see that the accommodation and modification process is very automatic for students. So a team comes together, they put together their plan, and those accommodations and modifications are just being implemented. And students don't typically have a lot of awareness of how they're being implemented or why. But at the college level, it's a very interactive process. No matter if they're in an inclusive higher education program or a traditional program, they have to be interactive and participatory in knowing what their accommodations or modifications would be, communicating those with their faculty members, asking for support and help as needed. So that, again, a big uptick in responsibility. Lots of structure in high school, typically a bell to tell you where to go. College does not offer that. Students are empowered to navigate their own schedule, to show up on time. Far less structure for them and lots more downtime we see for students. Also in high school, the parent is that primary point of contact. And even in inclusive higher education programs at the college level, the rule is that we don't talk about a student without the student. So the student is that primary point of contact. They can absolutely request that parents are communicated with from program staff, but really everything is going to funnel through the student. That's a big shift in responsibility and ownership for our students. And then also you'll see that there's typically one primary case manager or teacher that students kind of cling to or rely on at the high school level. Or at the college level, across all of these types of programming, students are encouraged to access resources across the entire campus. That there's not just one person they go to, but they learn who's in charge of certain areas of campus, certain resources, and they learn to use that as a natural support. Even with inclusive higher education programs, they'll have multiple staff members, but they're going to ask students to think of what's an office on campus that you could go to get that answer, really empowering them to think outside of just that one key person as their only resource. Then there's high family involvement and guidance at the high school level. And while that's still can be a process with students that pursue inclusive higher education, there's really a big shift from families determining what next steps are or what classes are taken to students determining what classes are taken, what job they want, what goals they have. It's very student focused and student driven. So hopefully none of those are a huge shock, but those are just big just changes that you're going to experience as students move into post-secondary education. There's a great link here from Think College, which is that national resource hub. That gives a good breakdown of some other differences between high school and college. So it's a good thing to review with students, review with teachers, so that you have that all on your radar. And these are some of the examples of those additional offices that colleges offer. So again, not where a student goes to one person all the time, but they're learning how to use these resources across a campus. Things like the tutoring center, the writing center, student life or activities or clubs that they're participating in, academic advising. All of these offices have different points of contacts for students to access. So with all of that, with all of the categories of disability supports, where we really want to hone in on is that inclusive higher education program, specifically for students with intellectual disabilities. So this is just a quick review of what those are, and we'll get into how they support our students. So this is an alternative admission process for students because, again, they don't meet that traditional entry criteria. So they don't have to have a typical diploma. They could have been using extended evidence outcomes or EEOs on their IEP all through K-12 and still be admitted into these programs. So students would apply to the program, and then if accepted to the program, then they become admitted to the institution. And we'll say across all of our documents and websites that you see that they're for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But we recognize that there's some gray area in that diagnosis. We know that not everybody has that explicitly on their IEP or on their diagnosis documentation. So really what schools are going to be looking for is if students would require modifications. So if they're able to enroll in college traditionally and go without modifications, we want to empower them to do that. But these programs are for students that would require those adaptations or limitation or changes to assignments to help the information be processed more appropriately and help those courses reach their cognitive level. So that's really the big indicator. But they're going to, as applications come through, they're going to look at all documentation and take in a pretty robust view of who the student is to see if this is a good fit. These programs, as I mentioned, are inclusive. So I don't want families to think that these are special education courses that happen to take place on a college campus. Our students enrolled in these programs are choosing courses from the course catalog like anybody else. They go independently, or maybe they have a peer mentor go with them, but they're surrounded by neurotypical college peers. They go to clubs and activities like anybody else. They live on campus like anybody else, all of those pieces. So it's very natural and normative for them. And that's really where we see students thrive, because that's so different from our K-12 models a lot of the times. Students are going to be taking courses, like I said, from the course catalog, but they're going to be in line with their career goal. So they're not going to take as many courses as a traditional college student. They take 2 to 3 a semester instead, so that it's more at their pace. But they're going to work with program staff to help tailor the courses that they're taking towards their career goal. And they can kind of piecemeal from across the college, which is really wonderful. And in those courses, they have access to the accommodations and modifications. So some examples, we have students that instead of submitting a 5-page paper, maybe they work really hard on a 1-page paper, or maybe they complete a graphic organizer that shows what they learned from a particular assignment or reading. Or maybe they're submitting a 5-slide presentation to show what they learned rather than in written form. So there's a wide variety of how students are accessing modifications while still participating fully in the courses that they're enrolled in. Because of those modifications, students earn a certificate, and we call that the Comprehensive Higher Education Certificate here in Colorado. It's approved by the Department of Higher Ed, and it's a transcript that they walk away with, something tangible. But as I mentioned, they get to have an area of emphasis, that major, even on that certificate. And then all the while, as they're learning how to navigate college classes and campus, they're also doing career readiness and independent development. So there's support in all of those categories. And these are the 4 pillars that we're going to camp out on as we move through our webinars this semester. So inclusive higher education programs offer support in all of these areas. So in the academic area, as I mentioned, they're included, but they have access to modifications. Peer mentors can go in and support them in a class, maybe help them understand what a pop quiz might mean, or to modify on the fly as needed. But they're going to be challenged and have high standards in their classes. And then with the social piece, peer mentors are really pivotal here. They can help students enroll in clubs and activities, even fraternities and sororities, which I know can feel scary for families, but we've had students rush those, and that's been a really wonderful experience for them. But really, we see our students kind of rise to the occasion, become leaders socially on campus, because they love the freedom of being able to choose what they're passionate about and what they experience. And then with the career, our program staff are going to work with each student to progressively experience career development. So first year, it's going to be more exploration. Second year, it's going to be focused on getting a job on campus, an internship on campus, maybe not in your area of interest, but at least starting to build those skills. Year 3 or 4, it's getting a job in your area of interest on campus or off campus, so that you're continuing to grow in your readiness for post-college employment. And then under the independence category, we have a few of our universities, or out of our schools, our universities offer on-campus living support for students, where staff or peer mentors can come in and help check in with cleanliness and roommate engagement and all of those pieces that come into living independently. But even if they don't live on campus, all students have access to a specialized course through these programs where they talk about independent living skills, money management, things like that, where they're still developing those skills explicitly. And that's the only removed portion of these programs. So their typical college courses are inclusive, but there is this one specialized course each semester for students to learn these skills more directly. So real quick, before I give you time to ask me questions about those, I just want to show you which schools we have currently in existence and which ones are coming down the pike. So Elevated ACC, that's Arapahoe Community College. That's in Littleton, Colorado. That's our one community college, which is a commuter campus. So there's no on-campus living for them. And it's a bit shorter of a program at three years typically for students to complete. UCCS in the Springs, they do have on-campus living, and their on-campus living is via an apartment complex on campus. Very fancy, I will say. I've seen it and it's beautiful and was far better than my college living experience. but students love it and they have a really great pulse on how to support students living independently. And their program is a typical 4-year program. Got UNC Goal, which stands for Go On and Learn. That's at Greeley, University of Northern Colorado in Greeley. And their on-campus living is dorm life, your traditional classic dorm life. And so students really love that. And that's typically a 4-year program as well. And then Global Inclusive, which is at Regis University. This is their 2nd year, so they started last year. Theirs is a bit quicker of a program. That might change over time, but right now it's a 1 to 2 year program. And they do have access to living on campus. And I believe they're dorms. I have to clarify that. They might be apartments as well, but I'm pretty sure they're your traditional dorms. And all of these programs down at the bottom, there's just some key things I want to point out. All of them have CTP status, which is that comprehensive transition and post-secondary program status, which allows for students enrolled in these programs to submit a financial aid application. So students can complete a FAFSA to receive federal grants or federal work study. Because all of the students enrolled in these programs would be walking out with a certificate credential instead of a traditional degree, they unfortunately don't have access to federal loans through the FAFSA. But you would still submit it like you would any other student, and it'll come back telling students what they're allowed to access. And we've been really surprised by how many grants and scholarships that students have been able to access through that. And then all of them have the same certificate. So we call that the comprehensive higher education certificate so that they can transfer. So we've had students start at the Elevate program at ACC and then transfer over to UNC and Greeley when they were ready to live independently. So that's a pretty natural process for students at the college level, and we wanted that to be the case for our students as well. And just as an overview, they admit students in the fall. So they'll never admit a new cohort in the middle of the academic year. So during the springtime is really when applications start to open and interviews happen in order to admit students in the coming fall. So those are the 4 that exist right now, and we have more coming. So we have a program popping up at CSU in Fort Collins, and that's called the RAM Scholars Program. Theirs is likely going to be on-campus living, but their focus, really their program focus, is going to be experiential learning and agriculture trade. So it's really for students that want to be in the agriculture field, hands-on work, and they're going to have some really strong internships coming up. And that is going to launch officially next fall. And then also MSU Denver, they're having a program be developed right now as well, and will launch next fall. Likely not an on-campus living experience just because of how densely populated that area is, but still a really wonderful program to help students build skills in a vocational area of interest. And then we're also working, starting in January, to recruit a couple more schools, one on the Western Slope and then another community college, just to ensure greater access. So like I said, we're going to be doubling in size over the next year, which is really exciting to hopefully offer more and more choice to the students that you're working with or the students that you live with that want to go to college. So even with inclusive higher education programming and all of those supports that really surround students in each of those categories, I want to point out that there's still that big shift in responsibility and growth for our students. So there is increased responsibility even when they're enrolled in these programs. There's still high standards, academic challenge, oftentimes like they've never experienced in K-12. And it's really cool to see how our students rise to the occasion and challenge themselves and show what they're capable of. Again, it's very student driven. We want to hold high expectations for our students because we see them reach it. And really our programs work on fading their supports over time so that students, by the time that they graduate their inclusive higher ed program, they are more ready for the real world and adulthood than they have ever been before. And so we encourage with all of those changes that preparing for college, inclusive higher education programs in particular, is important to start early. There's lots of ways to develop these skills that can help students be most successful. There's lots of resources to gather. And so starting the conversation early, starting the preparation early is really valuable. So for that, I give you kudos for being here and wanting to start that process early. So before we dive into what skills we can go into and how students can prepare for these programs, does anybody have questions about the programs themselves? Wonderful. As I mentioned, feel free to throw any questions in the chat if they come up, but you're also able to unmute and pause me if you need to. Yeah, if any more questions pop up, but we'll dive into the nitty gritty a bit. So this probably is not something that is new to any of you, but it's just something that is a good reminder for me. Anytime that we're talking about preparing students with intellectual disabilities for college, I think it's important to set the stage and the foundation for why we're doing that. It's not just so that they can have a similar experience as somebody else, but it's because they're capable and it's because they have a lot to offer. And so I think it's really important for us as educators, as family members, as advocates in general, to work on actively presuming competence and high achievement of our students, no matter their disability. And that's just really valuable to have that language as we're talking with IEP teams, talking with support services, that we're going to presume that our student is capable of doing what they're passionate about or what they're excited about. And we can put in supports to guide that process. And maybe it's slow, but it's still something we want to move towards. I also want to make sure that we're always having on the forefront of our mind that normative pathway, which essentially means what would we do for any other student at this age? Right? Any other high school student that's interested in college, what do we tend to do for them? We take them to college tours, we look online, we research, and we allow them to dream a little bit. And so we want to do that for our students with intellectual disabilities as well. And really, no matter if a student decides to go to college or not, we want them to make that decision and have it be an informed choice. So this is important for us, that we're not having educators or family members withhold the option of college from students because we're not sure if they're able to do it, but instead present this as an option and allow students the chance to opt out. We run a mentorship program every fall and spring where high school students come and they learn about college from students that are enrolled. And I have had several each semester say, yeah, no, I'm not interested in that anymore. That sounds like a lot of hard work. And it is, but it's so much better when they make that decision for themselves than when an adult around them makes that decision. So that informed choice is really powerful. And no matter if they pursue college or not, the skills we're going to talk about today are going to set them up for success in any sphere. Any college readiness skill can be transferred, is transferable to employment, to independent living. And so those are just really valuable things to have on their radar. And I think you're just going to hear me say this multiple times. High expectations are really powerful and lead to really powerful outcomes. So there was a review and a study and a survey done by Think College, and they concluded in 2015 that teachers' expectations have a greater impact on a student becoming employed or going to college than will a student's skills or disabilities. And this was specifically for ID population. And so I think that speaks volumes to what your role is and how you can encourage your students to reach for their goals and really achieve great things. So we're going to dive in to all of the ways that we can start looking at developing skills for our students with intellectual disabilities. And I'm pointing back to these 4 categories or these 4 pillars that we're talking about, because sometimes we can pigeonhole students of maybe they're really social. So we're going to hone in on these skills and focus really explicitly on these, but we forget about the academic development or the career readiness development. So I really want to encourage us to look at students and their preparation holistically. In all of these categories, there can be 1 to 2 things that you're helping your student really take a step forward in and take some ownership of growth and development. This is one of my favorite quotes from one of our graduate parents. She says that the bar has been set high and the students have risen and reached it. They've been presumed competent and their lives changed. And she is particularly, her student is primarily nonverbal and went to UCCS and graduated and is now working in hospitality. And she just has seen him thrive and seen him soar as an individual. So she's really speaking from that experience and the value of challenging her student or her kiddo in all of these areas. Okay, so we're going to dive into academics, which tends to be the main focus when we think of college for any other student. Are they academically ready? It's not the only category, but it's one that has a lot of context to it. So I always want to point out that no matter where our students with intellectual disabilities fall on the cognitive level, they can always grow in literacy skills, no matter how small those steps are. We believe that there's ability for growth. And so we don't want to remove literacy development from an IEP plan ever. We always want that to be on the forefront. Even when students are getting into transition programs, a lot of times academics kind of falls off their radar, which is normal. But we encourage families to be proactive in encouraging teams to still focus on some reading and some writing practice, because that never goes away in our life. We're going to have to write emails to employers. We're going to have to figure out paperwork. And so we want to continue to build that skill for our students. So some basic kind of go-tos that I encourage our families and our educators to focus on is just simple sentence and paragraph structure, providing some coaching on how to build those sentences can help with basic communication, email etiquette, all those things. And providing some templates for students to use, some assistive technology for them to use. That is really going to be foundational for them, because we've seen students work really hard on sentence development at the college level and then move to paragraph development and then move to what could be a full page paper. Really helpful. We also encourage that students would build some note-taking awareness, not because they have to write down every single word that somebody says in a classroom, but trying to pull, if they're in a general education classroom, or if they're even, attending a webinar, just trying to pull some big ideas from what they're hearing and writing those down. Could be a couple words that stand out to them, could be whole sentences or categories, but building in that practice is really helpful for them, so that they're aware that they are in charge of taking in information and that they can come back and review it later. Email etiquette is really big at the college level. Students, that's really the way they're communicated with and how they communicate with others across campus. So helping students know what's the right format for an email, what's the appropriate amount of emails to send to a faculty member, some of those key pieces. I encourage faculty or teachers oftentimes to just practice having like a 10-minute email practice session each week with students, maybe each day if we want to uptick that, but it helps them just get in a rhythm of checking email, learning how to write emails so that can help them in college and beyond. And then also use of audiobooks or just assistive technology in general. Because even though students are going to receive modifications at these college programs, they're still going to be empowered and encouraged to do readings, maybe on a smaller scale. Maybe they're going to be looking at the headings to see key big ideas or categories, or checking a summary, but they're still going to be challenged to read and take in this information. So maybe audiobooks or some other assistive technology to help students engage with information, written information. It's also important for students to know their learning needs. This kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier, where a lot of times the supports in high school happen for the students and they're not really sure how or why, but really sitting down with students and helping them understand what are your strengths and weaknesses as a learner. And that's important for all of us to know. And also, what are the accommodations that you use? What are the accommodations that you're not using? What are the modifications that you use? And having them just build an awareness of who they are as a learner, that's going to help them self-advocate far better at the college level and in their future than if they're just expecting these services to happen for them. So Elise will touch on some ideas for how you can help build that a little bit later, but that's just a good thing to have on our radar, that students would be empowered to know their learning needs. And then technology. So at the college level, it is very rare for students to submit a written piece of paper. A lot of times, that's a shock for our students of, I have to type this up and I have to submit this. And so our program staff will work with students on any of these categories, but it's always helpful for them to have some awareness beforehand so that it's not as much of a shock when they get into their classes. So that incorporates email access, that they would know how to access that and communicate via email, but also just office software, meaning pull up a Microsoft document and have students type those big ideas that they heard from a movie or something along those lines, where they're just practicing putting their learning into a technology format so that when they are submitting assignments, it's a little bit easier for them. Also at the college level, students are submitting assignments either via email or through an online database where they can access all of their course resources, all of those things. So anytime that you can kind of jump around and Google search some of those learning management systems like Canvas. I think Canvas is a common one. Blackboard is a common one. That's really helpful for students to see so that they know that there's going to be some electronic ways that they're submitting their work throughout their college career. And then again, assistive technology. So things like a screen reader on their computer that can help them listen to content that they're reading on their computer, or dictation. So maybe they're not really strong at physically typing or physically writing, but you guys can find assistive technology resources that allow students to speak to their computer and it tracks it down in a Google document. Google actually just has a great dictation option for free just to kind of practice. So even just opening up a Google document and giving that a go is helpful early on. So some additional academic components, and this is the only category I have 2 slides for, but there's enough for it. It's important for students to explore their academic interests. So not just what do you want to do for your future job, but like, what are you interested in learning about? I met with a student the other day who his job he really wants is in technology, but he told me that his favorite subjects are like math and science, and he's going to want to take a lot of classes in those areas. Some of the math and science that he takes may not directly apply to his specific career goal, but it's something that he wants to learn and develop in. And I think that's important for students to have access to that at the K-12 level. So looking at what are some classes they could enroll in with traditional students that just help them pique that interest a bit more and learn what they're excited about. Attendance and punctuality with classes is really important too. And punctuality can come along the same lines as submitting assignments on time and keeping track of those things, but really helping students to take ownership of this, not waiting for a teacher to tell them where to go or when to be at a certain class, but helping them to take ownership and think ahead so that they're practicing that attendance and punctuality early. This is a really big encouragement. I know that it is complex and that different IEP teams and schools operate differently, but as much as you can encourage inclusion for your students, the better for them. I just talked with a family today who is from the Western Slope, and their student was a part of a transition program for about a year, just enrolled at UCCS in their inclusive service program. And he's been there for 2 weeks. And she said he has like come alive in these 2 weeks. And she said it's truly the impact of being included. She said he had great teachers, he had great systems in K-12, but something about being naturally included live. And how powerful is that? And so we want to see that happening as early as possible. And that helps students see that they have a place in general education classes and inclusive settings, and they have a role to play. They can add to those classes. And so as much as you can advocate for that, I would encourage you to do so. And if there's ever a time where you have questions about how to advocate for that, how to strategize, I'm always happy to chat with educators and kind of brainstorm ways that we could do that. Another category under academics is for students to take on responsibility and or ownership of high quality work. So a lot of times when we're working with students at the college level, we encourage them to pause and review their assignments before they submit that email, before they submit it on that online learning platform. Because sometimes we can just throw a bunch of things out on a piece of paper and send it in, and it's not really high quality work. But when students are encouraged to slow down and to review, they tend to do far better. And they tend to even grow a little bit more in terms of their retention of information. And so really encouraging that at the K-12 level, pausing and really taking ownership of high quality work. Goal setting and tracking is an academic skill as well, helping students to see what they want to achieve and then how they're going to get there. What are the classes that are going to help them develop those skills or experiences that will help them develop those skills? Following a schedule, I've kind of already touched on this with that attendance, but really having students know what their schedule is and not waiting on an adult to tell them. So maybe it's an online app that prompts them that they put all of their classes into in advance, but that they are aware of where they're headed next and that they're owning their schedule. And then a big piece of your college coursework is that you're going to get feedback on it. Faculty, no matter if you're receiving modifications or not, they're going to say, hey, great work on this. We need to refocus this area, or maybe you need to study this differently. So it's really important for students to know how to navigate that constructive criticism and take it as a way to grow rather than a way to be defeated. And I think a lot of times our K-12 resource rooms or center-based programs don't have a lot of that constructive criticism for students, but it actually benefits them in the future. And that kind of correlates with having students have a persistence and growth mindset just in general, letting them know that failure will happen within college courses. They're not going to get all A's. They're going to be graded according to their modified assignments, and they might struggle. We've had a couple students have to retake classes, natural consequence of the work that they were putting in. But they've learned that through that, they can persist and they can do hard things. And I think that's really helpful for them to have a frame of reference for before they even get to college. So before I go into our next category, does anybody have questions about some of those academic skills that could be developed early on? Okay, we'll keep chugging. So under the social component, there's, I think, probably endless ways that we can all grow socially. But these are some of the big ones that we've pulled up for our students with intellectual disabilities, that when they come to college with these things in their back pocket, they are just set up for success in so many areas. So the first one, which can be very broad, is just self-awareness and self-regulation. And what we mean by this is students having an awareness of what are some scenarios that might trigger them or might cause them to feel anxious or overwhelmed? And how can they be aware of that so that they don't put themselves in those situations at the college level, or so that they have some practices or some coping mechanisms that they can access on their own when they're in those situations? I think a lot of times college students in these programs, this is the first time that they're like really surrounded inclusively. They're going to clubs, they're going to college parties, they're going to all of the typical things that you or I would have gone to. And sometimes that can be overwhelming. So helping them understand what are some of their triggers or some of their needs in social environments and having a plan for when things are not perfect, I think is really valuable. Schedule management, you'll see this again, that they know where they're going, they know who's picking them up, how they're getting there, those kinds of things, rather than being reliant on one person or one parent to tell them. There's also an important piece of knowing, just having a professional relationship awareness. So knowing the difference between how you communicate with a faculty member or staff member and how you communicate with your mom, or how you communicate with your friend or your sibling, and helping articulate that for our students early on so that they know this is how I am to be professional and have this kind of interaction. And this is when I can be goofy, and just learning those boundaries and those barriers is really helpful. Helping students to communicate their own needs. A lot of times we as family members that care deeply for our students or our kiddos and educators that care deeply, we can almost anticipate needs and like meet them proactively or just provide them for the student. But there's power in pausing and helping the student, coaching the student to tell me what you need right now. What are the concerns you have right now? What do you think would be helpful right now? Because in social settings, we want them to be able to do that out in the community. If they find themselves lost at a mall, we want them to communicate with somebody that they need help. And so coaching them through that now is really helpful. Conflict management. This speaks mainly to our roommate experiences with students that are in college. A lot of them, haven't had to navigate having a roommate live 5 feet away from them or sharing a bathroom. And this is normal for any college student to have to figure out, but learning how to communicate needs with a peer, how to apologize for mistakes with a peer, those kinds of things, how to just address some discontentment in friendships is helpful. And our program staff, they have peer mentors that guide students through this as needed because it's an ongoing learning curve. But addressing that early is helpful for our students to know I'm going to encounter conflict. It's kind of bound to happen in general. And here's how I think I want to approach that. And then on the social piece, this kind of links back to academics a bit too, when students are included naturally. But collaboration is really big. So when students are in college courses and included, they're going to be a part of group work. and they're going to be asked to participate in that and provide an active role in that. And maybe socially, if their friends are planning an event, they're going to be asked to participate and know their strengths and know what they can offer. And so a lot of times students that haven't experienced much inclusion kind of take the like bystander approach of just kind of floating around, but we really want to encourage students to know what their role is and how they can participate actively in social environments, or in class environments, as I mentioned, like group work. And so even encouraging educators to have group work options for students at the K-12 level is really valuable, so they can learn how can they be collaborating and participating actively. A big one is adaptability. We see lots of students who maybe their classes got scheduled last minute, or their friends canceled lunch with them on, at the campus cafe. And so really learning how to adapt to those changing plans, or just, anytime you're in a social setting, like people are gonna take you by surprise. And so coaching students through some adaptability. What do we do when things don't go the way that we anticipated? What are some ways that we can respond to that? And then a big piece that is hard for our families a lot of times to trust, because it can be really scary, is the responsible risk-taking option that we want for our students, and that we want them to try things and navigate things, and take risks, essentially, with awareness of what's responsible and good for them and what's safe and healthy, but really empowering them to take those risks. So a good option or a good category of this is when students are maybe going from class on one side of campus to the other. We want them to figure out what is going to be the best route for you. What's going to be a good transportation practice for you? Who do you need to call to help you get there? Where we want them to kind of figure that out. And if it doesn't work, they can pivot and figure out a new system to be able to pursue that task with responsible risk-taking. Use of social media is something that we've recently encountered a lot within our programs, of students having a healthy awareness of how to use social media. And there's, some supports out there for coaching on this, but essentially just presenting that students that are on social media, they're going to be seen by lots of different people, not just their peers, but they could be seen by educators or employers, and just having that awareness is really helpful. And then this is something you'll hear me say a lot, but use of natural supports. So we want students, like I said earlier on, not just to rely on that one staff member, but to think of who is a natural support that any other individual would go to for help in this scenario. So if they get lost on campus, we would want them to consider, what's the best place to go to figure out where to go? I'm going to find the welcome desk. There's going to be somebody employed in the institution at the welcome desk that I'm going to ask where I need to go, and they can help me, coach me through that. So those natural supports, so that we're not relying on a staff member or a parent or even a sibling or a peer mentor all of the time. It's really going to set students up for success in their future. All right. Any questions about the social piece before I get into career? Awesome. Okay, keep on going. I love it. So a big piece of skill development within career is helping students have career awareness, which what I mean by that is actually having a knowledge of what the job they think they want looks like. So doing job shadows, or even YouTubing what a day in the life of this particular job, actually knowing what that would look like, what the tasks are, because any college student can kind of dream up what their job might look like. And then day to day, there's paperwork or there's emails you got to do. So really helping students have an awareness of what each career that they're interested in really looks like, and then helping them to explore that a bit more. And then that's going to piggyback on their own self-awareness. So if they figure out that they love working with people and being in collaborative environments, maybe working a desk job is not going to be helpful for them, right? And so allowing that to be parallel, so that they're diving into, what does the career look like that I really want? And is that something that's going to fit my personality or my strengths or my weaknesses? Time management, this one is across all categories, that again, students would know how to be on time, how to be early for an interview, for a job shift, all of those pieces. Communication strategies. So this goes back to sometimes that email etiquette or even conflict management. How are they going to communicate with a supervisor or maybe with a job support or a job coach? And just having some different strategies and different scenarios that they can practice. Problem solving is really big on any job. A lot of times we're given projects or tasks, they don't go according to plan. And so we have to learn how to pivot. So coaching students through pivoting and problem solving, anytime they encounter frustration or something that they don't understand, coaching them through that thinking process. And this, I think, also ties with motivation and initiative. So having students understand what motivates them to continue a project or to continue a task, so that they can take initiative on a job, so that they can be a leader on a job and not just sit back and wait for tasks to be told to them, but consider what are some motivational components that they can think about in any given job. Are they really excited about positive reinforcement from their boss? Do they love specific tasks that they could reward themselves with at the end of the day? Things like that. And then self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is big in all of these categories, no matter where students land, but especially at the job, when accommodations are needed or where there's concerns on if their job is working or not. And having the boldness to communicate with supervisors, to communicate needs or concerns is really helpful. And then also having that social and emotional understanding. I think with any job, no matter how fun it may be, there can be high stress moments. And so having students understand, like, what are, again, those triggers for them? What are some coping mechanisms that they can utilize in the job setting? And how can they communicate that with their supervisor and have support as needed? Which links to those coping techniques. And then I'm going to blaze back through this independence category. And as you guys can see, in each of these categories, these skills kind of merge and kind of blend together overall, but it's sometimes helpful when you need to break it down a bit. So with independence, we really want to encourage students to navigate campus. So navigating their current surroundings, going to class on their own and using maybe peer mentors as support initially, but then fading that. Having an awareness of personal and campus safety. So with each of our programs, our students connect with the campus security team on campus so that they know them, they know where to go, they know how to call them if they need. So even things like that at the K-12 level, if there's a security officer, we want our students to be aware of that individual, know what they're there for, to help them with if needed, and to access those supports naturally. That also includes travel, not just on a campus, but around the community, especially with college campuses. Those campuses are far bigger than a high school campus. So you might be crossing streets to get to your next class. So navigating what are healthy ways or safe ways, I should say, to travel. What are some systems of transportation that work for you? What are some options in your community that could work as well? This is a big one, the use of downtime. So many students have their day prescribed for them minute by minute before they get to college, and having an awareness of how to use downtime well is an art for our students. And so there are some ways to build in that awareness, but even just giving them like a list of options of, hey, you have 2 hours before your next class. What are some good things we can do with that time? Or what are some misuses of that time? And that's okay. Students will scroll social media like anybody else, but providing them that idea and at least that choice to choose between some meaningful uses of time and some not so meaningful uses of time. Medication management is something that's really helpful for our students to start to develop while there's support from family, because that is a really big deal. And there are some students that may not ever be independent in that medication management, and that's okay. There are ways to use services, community-based services to help. If students are living on campus or living in an apartment on their own, there can be providers that come in and support that. But again, going back to that presumed competence, we want to empower them as much as possible to be independent in that. Self-care and cleanliness. So just having those minor tasks of picking up after yourself, taking care of yourself, washing your body, all of those things are things we want students to start to prompt in themselves to have some independence in. And then interagency supports. What I mean by that is being connected to different support agencies that can help with independent living. So being connected with your community center board or a Medicaid waiver, where you can have somebody come in, whether you're living on campus or not, have somebody come in on a regular basis to check in on cleanliness and how you're doing. And then money management. So with students going away to college, it's really important for them to have access to a bank account for them to purchase food as needed or to go to the grocery store. So building in awareness of that now with family support really sets them up for success so that it doesn't feel like this exciting new thing where they could spend $250 at Starbucks. We want them to have an awareness of how to use that money well. And again, within these inclusive college programs, there is money management guidance in their specialized course, but making sure that they have access to that and have some awareness of how to utilize money is valuable. And then just home-based responsibilities that includes that cleanliness and that self-care, picking up after yourself, trash, those kinds of things. Having them practice those things now with independence is going to set them up for success. So those are all of the skills that I blazed through with you guys. I appreciate you hanging in there. And before we talk about some of the techniques to implement them, does anybody have questions swimming around about these techniques or about these areas of support in college?
I do.
Yeah, go for it, Lisa.
All of these bullet points have been addressed in each of these areas. Now, is that something part of their peer mentorship that helps them with these things? Or because you talk about, the program wants them to do this.
Yeah.
How do they learn that that's what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, good question. So really the intention of these bullet points is to have it on parents' radars and educators' radars before college, just to think through how are we building awareness of that early on. But in line with what you said, there's going to be gaps. None of us are going to go to college. None of our students, or us included, are going to have all of that figured out, right? So what they do in these programs is they're going to have a person-centered plan meeting. So once they're admitted, they're going to meet with their program staff and say, okay, what are the things you want to pursue? Those academic interests, let's talk about that. What are some of the social things you want to do? And what are some of our strengths and weaknesses? And they're going to coach them through some goals. And then the program staff, which meet with them weekly, and peer mentors will help check in on those goals in all of those categories. So they may not address all of those bullet points at once. We'll take it one step at a time.
Yes.
But yeah, they'll come together with a person-centered plan for the student to say, okay, what are we going to focus on this semester? What are some of those skills we really need to hone in on?
I wasn't sure if that was something that we should prepare them for, because I'm looking at all those bullet points and I'm thinking,
how?
I don't know that we do all of that at home. That is something that he would experience at college, but would need to be at college to know how to deal with these things.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of both. There's a little bit of both, where I think anytime that you can scratch the surface on some of those skills early on, it's great for the student so that it's not as an overwhelming transition. But regardless, our program staff are going to work with these students to kind of chug away at those goals in those categories.
Okay.
Yeah, great question, Lisa. Anybody else have questions floating around? Okay, well, we're going to jump into some of those examples, and this might help too, Lisa, with, okay, well, if we're going to try to bring up these categories or these goals for our students, what are some ways that we could start that now where it feels a little bit more tangible? Because I recognize that's a lot of things to go after, and we don't anticipate all students and all educators and all parents to do that, but it's good to just kind of have the whole picture. So Lisa's going to dive in to, some ways to implement them.
Awesome. So we're going to start just with general techniques, and then we are going to sort of break out into different sort of domains of probably your student's day or life, right? So what kind of skills can you work on at home, in school, right? Kind of everywhere they go. So Lisa just set us up with that really great question. So the very first thing that's really important, and Shana mentioned this at the beginning, it's important to instill a growth mindset. College is hard. It's hard for everybody. And it's going to be hard for our students with intellectual disabilities too. And we want to remind them that they can do it. It's going to be hard, but if they persevere and they sort of remember times in their lives when they've needed to, do hard things, they can do it, right? So just instilling that growth mindset, from day one, and it's never too late to do that. That's really important. And then we also want to create an environment of choice. We want to remind students that they don't have to do things they don't want to do. They don't have to go to college if they don't want to do it, right? Shana mentioned that student who went through mentorship and decided, no, thank you. And that's okay. But we do want to remind students that they get a lot of choice in college specifically, right? They get to, sorry, my puppy's barking at me. They get to, choose how to spend their free time. They get to choose what to do, when to do homework, things like that. So we want to remind them, right, that they get choice all along, and start giving them choices, right, early on, from things like, what do you want to wear to school today, right? There's never a choice that's too small to start practicing with. And that may seem like that is too small for where your student is at right now. And you know where they're at, and you know what kind of choices you can start giving them, right? So again, these are just some techniques that might apply at home and at school. The other thing that we really want to remind you about is to fade supports over time. A lot of us get really used to providing just kind of everything that our students need. As Shana mentioned, it can become, sort of like a survival technique to predict triggers and things like that, and sort of, overly support in ways that they might not need. And it is important to fade those supports over time so that we can work towards independence. And so there's a way that we can sort of do that with prompting. Shana, if you go to the next bullet. Thank you. So we want to start with prompting with our least intrusive prompts, and then sort of give them time to sort of, figure it out if that's enough. And if not, then we can include even more prompts. So start with an open-ended question, right? The difference between an open-ended question and a closed-ended question, a closed-ended question might be a yes, no. It's something that you can answer with one word. So start with an open-ended question, just to sort of start, getting the memory trickling back. Do you remember a time when might be a yes, no question, right? But instead of that, you could ask like, well, what did you learn in class that day, or whatever, right? So that it really does force them to sort of think about the time when that you're trying to get them at, right? So that would be that prompting to recall background information, things that they maybe learned yesterday, or an experience they had at summer camp last year, really anything, whatever applies to the situation. And then you want to cue to natural sources of information, right? And so this is going to be the most sort of direct of these prompts, the most intrusive of these prompts, right? But you really want to help them figure out, okay, if what they naturally know isn't sort of helping them get there, where can they find it? And they can help you also identify where they can find it. Oftentimes they know, you just sort of need to remind them of that. And then finally, we need to allow for that dignity of risk. And again, this is something that Shana already talked about. College is challenging, and transition can be challenging, and high school can be challenging, and the soccer field can be challenging, and all sorts of things that, we do every day can be really hard. And if we don't put ourselves out there and we don't take risks, we're not learning how to persevere, and we're not learning the skills that we need for next time when something is hard. And so that really does kind of go in with that growth mindset, just the reminder that you can do hard things, and it's okay if you fail, and I'm here for you if you fail. And also, we're all going to fail, right? So then at home, some of the conversations you can start having, some of the things you can start doing to help prepare your student for college. So this link, when Shana sends out the presentation tomorrow, when you click it, you'll see it goes to our webpage and our financial resources. You can also come to our financial webinar in a few weeks. I believe that one's in September, where we'll go through that information in a lot more depth. But you can start talking with your student about what can they do to help support their college dreams financially. You can also start doing things that will be expected of them in college, like managing their own calendar. And in college, almost all of them use Google Calendar or some form of calendar where the program staff can see their calendar and they can see their calendar, right? So you might want to start with something like that, even the calendar app on their phone, prompt them to set their own alarm, record their own dentist appointment. Maybe they're even calling to make their own dentist appointment, depending on, what you think they can handle. And for those of you who have students who do have a medication management routine, you can even start with things like vitamins, right? Or like a, daily probiotic, things that if they miss it, it's really not the end of the world, but it is kind of that entry point to help them figure out how they can do it on their own and empower them to do it on their own. For students who go off to college and they live independently, and then, beyond college for people who live independently, cooking is oftentimes, what we hear is the hardest thing. So learn to make a few staple meals. It can start off with like boiling water for pasta and having a peanut butter and jelly. They don't need to be like gourmet 5-course meals, but we all kind of need those things in our back pocket. Students can pack their own backpack before school. Maybe they can even pack their own lunch before school. Just things to sort of help empower them to be as independent as possible. As Shayna mentioned earlier, cleaning routines. So this could be household chores. This could also be personal cleanliness, showering, brushing teeth, things like that. And then at school, these are things that teachers and paraprofessionals can help with, but you can also empower students to ask for these things. So leading their own IEP meetings, even if they're not leading the whole meeting, at least being in the meeting, right? We want them to know that we're talking about them and give their own sort of opinions on what goals they think they can reach and what goals they want to reach, right? Maybe they want to try new things. So we want them to be in those meetings. We want them to be advocating and for you to advocate on their behalf as well, to be in inclusive settings for as many things as possible, not just, our specials and electives and things like that, but when possible, and we think it's mostly always possible, to be in inclusive gen ed classes as well. And when they're in there, to have high expectations. They're not going to be alone. They will have supports. They'll have natural supports from their peers. Oftentimes they'll have a paraprofessional, if not a special ed teacher in the classroom with them, right? But wherever they are, their expectations should be high and they will meet those expectations. They can have, in their emails, when they're practicing sending emails and things like that, they should also be practicing checking their emails. And that's hard to do if they're not receiving emails. So we should be CCing them on any email threads, even if it's just like emailing the teacher, hey, I want to let you know that there's an appointment at 2:00. Clue them in on that, right? And so that way they know in their own head, hey, I have an appointment at 2:00, but also it helps them practice receiving emails. They can practice responding that way as well. And then we also want to have the student meet with the teacher, meet with the paraeducator, and really advocate for their own needs. And so, they may not remember their whole IEP and everything that's in there, but they probably know that they're going to need help with this or that. And they should be empowered to share that with the people who are going to help them do that. And then also as practice for college and for, general life of making choices, giving them choice to be in the classes and in the extracurriculars outside of school as well that interest them, that don't totally bore them, right? And then finally, we want to help provide supports for them to get a lot of these things done, right? So sometimes it's helpful just to have like 10 minutes a day to check emails, jot down all the homework in our planners, anything like that that kind of goes along with just personal organization. Maybe it's cleaning out the locker if that's something that your student struggles with, but there's just a lot of ways that we can help support their organization skills. And then finally, in the community, we encourage a lot of students to volunteer. And that sort of gives them the ability to be part of things that they care about, but it also gives them the opportunity to sort of be in normative environments with people of all kinds and really get to experience the community, in its truest form. And also it's a way to have fun. We want to have students, learn what they want to do when they grow up. What do they want to do when they go to college? So we can coordinate job shadows. We can have students intern. There's a lot of different ways that we can get students involved vocationally before they get to college. And then we can also have students identify, find, and then if they're ready, even register for their own events and activities. So this helps empower them to make choices. It also helps empower them to be self-sufficient in a lot of different ways that are pretty low stakes. As Sheena mentioned, public transportation is really important, especially for students who are on commuter campuses. Maybe they need a ride to get to school every day. So we can help practice learning the RTD system, for example, if you're in the Denver area. And we can even do that in ways like, we're going to go down to a Rockies game, so let's take the light rail to do that. And then you have your student help you go online. You look up the schedule, you look up what line you need to be on, things like that. So there's a lot of ways we can practice for travel training. And then practice using natural supports is really important. So a good community example of a natural support might be you're in the grocery store and you don't know where the rice is. So maybe you ask the clerk at the store, what aisle is the rice in? Things like that to practice having appropriate and respectful conversations with people who are natural supports. And then finally, connect with your local community-centered board. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it pretty easily, or we can help connect you. But these are organizations that are going to help provide outside resources. Sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's other types of supports, but they are going to be really crucial in college and beyond. And then just to kind of close it out, bring us home, we want to remind you, you're not alone. It's really common in the disability world to sort of feel like you're fighting an uphill battle, but we're here to remind you we're part of your village. There is a massive village as well outside of us trying to help support you and provide whatever you need. And just take it one step at a time. You don't have to send your student to college next fall if they're not ready, or the fall after that even. It's never too late, and they're at the stage where they're at. And then these are just some community agencies that, like I said, you're part of a village. So these are just some. There are so many, though. This is an absolutely non-exhaustive list. So we have DVR and SWAP. We have various ARC chapters, CCBs, as I already mentioned, Peak Parent Center, as well as other parent groups, and so many more. The list goes on and on and on. And then finally, this is just sort of an overview of some of the handouts that Shayna will include in her email tomorrow when she sends you this recording, as well as the slides. So you'll get a few guides on how to prepare for college, some checklists and things like that. Not checklist in terms of, okay, we did a student-led IEP, that's done, but just sort of to see, what are some things that you can keep doing, right? Not a one and done, but to help prepare your student as well as you as a parent for college. One of the handouts here on the left will include skills to sort of work on based on what age your student is in. But these are also, all the skills are important at all ages, right? So just because your student is in high school doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing things that are in the early childhood list, right? They kind of compound on each other. You'll get a list from UCCS of the top 10 actions to take specifically while you're in high school to help prepare for college. And that's a really high quality list created by the people who are, boots on the ground in those programs. And then finally, these are just some things that you'll receive that IN specifically does and can provide. Our webinar series, which you're here, our newsletter, our mentorship program, which applications will launch on Friday if you want your student, or if your student wants to be involved in that. Again, that's for high school students. And then we'll send you some national resources. Really, the one I want to point out here is the State of the Art Conference, or SOTA for short, is in Colorado Springs this year. That's a national conference for inclusive higher ed. So that's a great place to go. There's going to be a big fair and a lot of different places that you can go to learn. And it's exciting that it's local this year for the first time. And then for those of you who have you're either teachers or you have students who you want to help them in their IEP process and become more involved in their own planning of that, these can help you. And these can also be things that you can share with their teachers to help plan IEPs that help students work towards college goals specifically, or college readiness. And with that, if anybody has any questions, you can put it in the chat, you can unmute. We're happy to help however we can.
And I just want to reiterate too, we know that this can be a lot to tackle. And the fact that you guys have shown up and wanted to learn about what college options are ready or out there for your students and how to help them get ready, I think that sets the tone already that you're in the right spot and on the right trajectory. So this is kind of here as hopefully a litmus test that you can come back to, or what are some of the skills that we can work on now, or our student has achieved some of these categories. Now we want to step up to the next one. So hopefully it's something that you can refer back to. Not that these resources are something that you need to have in place and implement right away, but something that you can come back to. So with that in mind, does anybody have questions about those skill development pieces or about inclusive higher education in general? I know we didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about the programs themselves, so. Wonderful. All righty. Well, thank you guys for hanging with us this evening. We will have, as soon as we close out our Zoom meeting, there's going to be a screen that pops up that prompts you to fill out a quick survey for us. That lets us know if this information was helpful for you or what other information you might need. Some of that information might be covered in future webinars, so we encourage you to check out what our remaining 7 will be this fall. But when that screen pops up, if you just click continue, it's going to bring you to the form that lets us know how we can improve and continue resourcing you. But so excited for those of you that have students that are interested in college, and excited that you're going to be connecting them with options and helping them prepare. So thank you so much for coming and taking time in your evening to learn more.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was awesome.
Good. Great to meet you both. Wonderful.